Key point 1. Seriously, what's wrong with us? Amid the bustle of the 21st century, few realize how tiny we are in the span of humanity's history. If we were to summarize our entire history in a 1,000-page book, we'd only emerge in the final pages. And what seems like ancient history is very fresh when viewed from a larger perspective. For example, the scientific revolution and the age of colonialism unfolded on page 999. Page 1000 encompasses U.S. history from the 18th century to the 2020s. While it granted us many freedoms we're lucky to have now, this period also brought devastating wars, the rise of nuclear weapons, and a growing concern about climate change. At this very moment, we stand at a mysterious yet frightening page 1001. What advancements and calamities will it bring, and what direction will humanity choose? Despite our technological advances, humans are not becoming more mature as civilization progresses. Having more resources does not necessarily bring more wisdom. Political and class divisions continue to rise, and society seems to be more divided than ever. Where did we go wrong, and what can we do to prevent potentially even worse mistakes in the future? Initially an author of the blog The Story of Us, Tim Urban started writing to answer this question, and his research took him on a 6-year journey exploring how societies form, think, and organize. By analyzing American society from its inception to now, he developed a unique framework that we can apply to view the contemporary world and diagnose its problems. Discover what we can do to steer humanity in the right direction before it's too late. Let's act like the authors of our humanity story, not characters in its overarching story. Key point 2. How do we think? From Plato to Descartes, philosophers put forward their theories about the mysterious human mind. It's much easier with animals, as their minds represent many instructions coded by their need to survive. It's akin to software. Whoever's software works the best and is kept up to date will have the best chance of living and passing on their genes. But humans have progressed so far that we can take control of our environments. The problem lies in the pace of that progress. Our brain software is still operating according to the rules of our old habitat, yet to be updated to the newer, fancier world of the 21st century. The good news is that we aren't stuck with these primitive programs wired for survival. Our cognitive abilities are what make us different from other animals. Let's compare the two minds we possess. Primitive mind chases dopamine and basic human needs like survival, sustenance, and reproduction. Higher mind makes sense of the world, allowing us to think abstractly, self-reflect, and learn from our experiences. As much as we want these two to be in balance, the contemporary world is competing for our attention while we are continuously hunting for pleasure. When the primitive mind gains too much control, we drift toward nonsensical behavior. For instance, have you ever found yourself mindlessly indulging in snacks? That's the primitive mind taking charge, while our higher mind would argue against processed food. Our primal instincts are drawn to the flavors and calories they contain. Giving in to the primitive mind makes us short-sighted, fostering addictions and vulnerability. But above everything, primitive and higher minds affect how we perceive different ideas. Do we think critically or hold our beliefs as sacred and unquestionable? There are a few ways we can process information, such as, like a scientist. The scientist's thinking uses the higher mind. They are skeptical, open to multiple viewpoints, and constantly evaluating information. Like a sports fan. Contrary to scientists, sports fans root for a specific outcome, just like they would cheer for their favorite team's victory. Like an attorney. In a court case, an attorney must prove a single point of view and win, just as many do with ideas. Like a zealot. The zealot allows the primitive mind to run the show. They hold their beliefs sacred, identifying with them so much that challenging them feels like an insult. Key point 3. The impact of group culture on beliefs. Whatever environment we're in, be it work, school, or the streets, we become a part of the unwritten rules of its culture. These groups praise some behaviors and values while shaming others. We engage in multiple cultures at any given moment, embracing their rules and beliefs. Most groups fall into two types. Idea Lab. These environments prioritize high-rung critical thinking, valuing independence and multiple points of view. Discussions rarely become insults or arguments, but a battlefield for sourcing ideas and collaboration. Like scientists, people participating in an idea lab investigate different hypotheses and look to expand their ways of thinking. Echo chamber. Characterized by low-rung thinking, these groups encourage the same thinking patterns and conformity. Disagreement is akin to an insult, while all debates turn into an inevitable fight. Echo chambers hold specific ideas sacred, discouraging innovation and creative thinking. On either side of the spectrum, these multiple small groups can start collaborating and uniting into one massive group, a giant. Idea labs can give way to larger societies where exploration and critical thinking are encouraged. There, people can thrive freely as individuals and smaller groups within a bigger system. But when echo chambers unite, this is where things become dangerous. Despite not knowing anything about the history of Mongolia, many have heard of Genghis Khan and his large conquering quests. His army was mighty, granted to its strict conformity rules. Everyone who deserted from the battlefield was instantly put to death. The Mongol army was a perfect example of a golem, a giant born out of echo chamber culture. A golem is a society built on low-rung thinking that relies on obedience and brute force. Golems thrive on the us versus them mentality, usually united in a fight against a dangerous external enemy. They suppress individuality and encourage sacrifice for the sake of the group, appealing to our primitive minds. This way of thinking is how humanity has survived throughout history, grouping into a golem and fighting against another, more formidable golem. In the 21st century, golems are on the rise. They feel incredibly comfortable using the tools our online world offers. Golems filter and twist information through the media, creating a special echo chamber for their followers, unable to look outside the bubble. Did you know? Studies reveal that individuals with higher IQ scores tend to be less inclined to revise their beliefs. The ability to recognize patterns quickly increases the likelihood of falling for stereotypes. Key point 4. When politics turns into a Disney movie, people refer to the present political situation in America by various names. The advent of authoritarianism, polarization, and the political divide. We see the rise of tribal culture in politics, supported by various golems. Let's take an introspective look into the past century. After 2 world wars, the national unity of American society was relatively high. On the other hand, the 60s brought a lot of chaos and division with the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. The split between the Republican and Democratic parties started widening exponentially, worsening with every election. This rivalry gave way to hypercharged tribalism. The two sides are so opposed to each other that hate starts consuming them like an epidemic. This feeling of disgust triggers dehumanization, political bigotry, and justifying attacks on others. In the last 30 years, the proportion of people who view another party as highly unfavorable has tripled. Such tribalism affects nearly every sphere: education, religion, and business. For example, while only 5% of Americans were against their child marrying an opposing party member, this number has risen to 30 to 40%. It affects society in all the hidden ways we can't even comprehend. But the problem is not thinking in left or right ways. It's once again about low versus high thinking. High-rung thinking places high value on truth. It interrogates and criticizes. It analyzes how we can get from point A, what we have now, to point B, the desired political situation. But low-rung thinking can be much more destructive, close-minded, and unfavorable to introspection. By manipulating internet algorithms, prioritizing social media virality over truth, and adding a dimension of drama and conflict to politics, media outlets use these methods to play off our low-rung thinking. The media's destructive cherry-picking leads to even more division and biases. Media businesses often tap into the primitive mind, making it easy to confuse political junk food for nutritious content. What are we left with in the end? A political Disney world. Disney movies offer a simple picture of the world. There are clearly good and bad guys. There's no room for nuance, no space for complexity, human flaws, or compassion for each other. Opposed to each other, we start treating politics similarly, good and bad parties, with clearly perfect politicians and terrible ones, proposing right and wrong policies. Our political Disney world turns black and white, prioritizing one political narrative and completely denying the other. Key point 5. The story of Red Gollum. Growing up in Massachusetts, Tim knew there was only one suitable candidate to vote for, a Democratic one. Every election, he observed, turned into a good and bad guy battle. As he headed for college, most students there were mourning over Bush's victory, much like the rest of California. Tim wanted to remain critical and not become a tribal Democrat. But the deterioration of Republican Party methods made it impossible to sympathize with them. That's when he decided to look back and research how the Red Party became the Gollum it is today. Since its inception, the Republican Party has positioned itself as the golden middle, an example of pragmatic and moderate policies. A more extreme version of its values also existed under the umbrella of Republican fundamentalists, who came in opposition to the rebellious New Left in the 1960s. The image of Republicans improved with Ronald Reagan, an eloquent speaker who constructed the party's beautiful narrative of freedom and the American dream. His speeches didn't divide, but emphasized the common humanity of all Americans and the shared values that the country was built upon. In his effort to encourage Americans to unite despite disparities, he was a high-rung political candidate. However, the 90s Republicans were nothing like Reagan. Determined to win over Congress's majority, they resorted to extreme tactics to undermine the opposing party, from labeling the entire Congress as corrupt and ineffective to calling Democrats traitors and anti-family. Bush's presidency followed shortly after, enhancing the us versus them division to win over popular support for the war in Iraq. This method led to further tribalism, evident during the Republican anti-Obama coalition when the Democratic Party won the elections. And that's the scary thing about the U.S. system. At some point, it crosses a line where the system stops working. Tim Urban. The victory in the war against the Democratic enemy became of the highest importance to the Republicans, even if it came at the expense of the core American value of liberalism. Decades after Reagan, the advent and popular support of Donald Trump brought the low right to the forefront of American politics. The war against the Democratic Party turned into a fight against democracy, and it was frighteningly successful. Political golems thrive by subverting rules, prioritizing conformity, and eroding trust in vital democratic processes. Key point 6. The blue golem is on the rise too. It's easy to blame Donald Trump for the rise of Republican tribalism, while ignoring the golem-like processes in the opposing party. So, let's dive deeper into the divisions within the blue side of politics. America's origin story represents the fairy tale of liberalism, a country based on the values of enlightenment, protecting the sacred rights to freedom of every individual. However, not everyone had equal rights or opportunities in this perfect land. Throughout the 20th century, the United States has seen multiple social justice movements battling against discriminatory laws against women, people of color, and the LGBTQ+ community. These movements gradually led to a new direction, different from the progressive liberalism that Democrats usually represent: social justice fundamentalism, SJF. SJF seeks to dismantle the system that America was built upon. The movement believes the political system as a whole is flawed, allowing privileged classes to profit off the oppressed. Thus, Americans are born into an imbalanced society, permeated by the unseen forces of racism, sexism, and homophobia. The only way to advance is to overthrow the system based on that bias and start from scratch. With such a definitive look at American society, SJF has become a part of the lower realms of the political Disney world. It splits society into privileged and oppressed, racists and anti-racists. There is no room for debate, so such thinking becomes an accepted truth of its own. There are two problems with the SJF movement. One, it creates an echo chamber. Staying woke and questioning privilege are the core values behind this movement. Diverging from this way of viewing reality can often be punished by being branded as racist, sexist, or homophobic. It rejects the idea of the universal experience of being human, claiming that people from different backgrounds are incapable of understanding one another. Hence, as a privileged group member, discussing or having opinions on the oppressed group's experiences is prohibited. For example, a white scholar inherently cannot have a say on topics of racism. 2. It gives way to bigotry. SJF starts by inciting bigotry against privileged groups, discussing them as manipulators who secretly rig society's structure to their advantage. But it also facilitates soft bigotry against oppressed groups, holding them to lower standards and creating a patronizing environment for them. Free speech fosters open discussion of diverse ideas, enabling societal progress. Key point 7. Idea supremacy is the real problem. Regardless of where we stand on the political spectrum, the rise of idea supremacy is apparent. By combining low-rung thinking and authoritarianism, idea supremacists force their echo chambers on others. Their ideology is further enhanced by promoting victimhood culture. Victimhood culture encourages people to define themselves through suffering and trauma. Victimhood stems from personal experience or identity, supposedly making an individual vulnerable. It can be easily used as manipulation, as even minor insults can be viewed as traumatic as violence within this culture. Assuming the role of a victim implies a reliance on others, like an authority or support group, to resolve conflict and have the offender punished. Cancel culture is a great example of this phenomenon. From canceling people to canceling events, the whole effort is directed toward finding and punishing new villains. Social media became a masterful instrument for those on a mission to cancel others. Algorithms quickly pick up the breaking news about the villain's wrongdoings, instantly becoming radioactive for society. Anonymity removes the need for accountability, and thousands of angry voices happily dehumanize and banish the victim to the outgroup. We're now creating a surveillance society where the smartest way to survive is to go back to being voiceless. Tim Urban. Idea supremacists have prospered on college campuses, canceling over 100 events involving speakers they disagree with in recent years. If the invitation isn't revoked instantly, students apply more violent tactics, shutting down the event or shouting over the speaker. Unfortunately, such disruptions prevent the free circulation of ideas on campus, robbing other students of an opportunity to hear alternative points of view and be informed. The result: freedom of expression is stifled. Whether on social media platforms or university campuses, spaces designated for a robust marketplace of ideas must accommodate the expression and critique of all viewpoints. However, cancel culture relies on fear tactics and penalizes ideas creators instead of fostering a culture of healthy discussion. When people are afraid to speak openly, seeing the truth without distortion good and bad guys, but we are the participants with our futures at stake. Seemingly, the two are a threat. We forget to recognize and celebrate our differences, accepting each other's right to make mistakes. Relatively good and peaceful times like these create space for foolish people and allow us to. So, let's act on this downward spiral while it's not too late. It all starts with acknowledging that this. Closest to you. Be courageous. Don't be afraid to say what you think. Participate in healthy debates and share your opinions.